Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed at 1,000 subscribers. I'll be posting a special video. I removed Zoe from the family chat and pressed send. The blue ticks lined up and then went dead. My phone buzzed on the counter like a trapped bee. I held it down with my palm and breathed once. I would not take it back tonight. I'm Helen, 58. My girls stand on opposite shores and I built the bridge. Today I burned the boards one by one. Smoke still clings to my tongue when I swallow. No one knows why yet, but they will. Is this a joke? Lena's text popped up first. Then Dad's question mark arrived like a rubber bullet. Aunt Myra wrote, please call me now, with 3 dots. I let them stack up while the screen pulsed. Silence can be a hammer if you hold it. Mark called twice and then again after a gap. I rejected each ring without opening his name. The 4th time I stared until it stopped. He would not hear my voice before Christmas. He already heard too much in my house. I typed one line to the thread and hit send. Plans changed for Zoe, she will not attend. The dots danced from 3 people and then died. Lena wrote Mom what happened and left it there. I left it there too and felt the floor tilt. The kettle clicked off and I didn't pour. My hand hovered over the cup like a drone. Hot air rose and fogged my glasses for a beat. I took them off and wiped them slow. Clarity hurts more when you earn it. A car door slammed outside and I froze. Footsteps came quick on the path and then stopped. The bell rang twice and then once after a pause. Open up, Lena called through the wood with a cough. She never coughs when she is calm. I cracked the door wide and stepped aside. Lena swept in with eyes like a crosshair. What did she do? She asked without sitting down. I folded my arms to keep them from shaking. I was not ready to cut the wrapping yet. Tell me now. Her jaw jumped as she waited. I gestured to the chair and she ignored it. We stood in the tight hallway, breathing short. Truth pressed between us like a locked safe. She would kick until the hinges cried. Not here. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen. She followed close enough to shadow my heels. The table waited with 4 placemats and 1 crumb. I brushed it away and stared at the wood. My hands prefer tasks when words threaten blood. Is Zoe in trouble with money or work? Her voice softened and then hardened on work. I shook my head and saw her shoulders lift. Relief tried to land and then veered off. She sensed the cliff edge and looked down. She crossed a line, I said like a whisper. Lena frowned and leaned back from the table. Which line? She asked and tapped once with a finger. I opened my mouth and heard the bell again. The timing hit like a staged cue. Don't answer that, Lena hissed with a quick glare. The bell rang longer and then stopped mid-tone. A text flashed from Zoe and lit the room. I refused to open it while Lena watched. Some messages burn cleaner when unread. Fine, Lena dragged a chair and finally sat. You kicked her out of Christmas for a reason. Her foot bounced under the table and shook it. My cup rattled and tapped the saucer twice. She lifted her eyes and waited for the blade. This will crack the family, I said and paused. It will also save it, I added without breathing. Lena's face shifted like a door on a bad hinge. She wanted yes and feared yes in the same second. I held the pause until it hurt. I need details. She rubbed her wrist and stared. I closed my eyes once and counted 3. No backstory would help us crawl through this. Only the live wire of now would do. I reached for the wire and felt it hum. You will hate me for waiting 24 hours. I kept my voice flat and my eyes steady. I needed proof that would not bend under crying. Lena flinched at crying like it stung her skin. I saw the question form and stop. The doorbell stayed quiet and my phone buzzed again. A short message from Mark slid across the screen. We need to talk before she talks, and please. I turned the phone face down and leaned forward. Lena saw the name and went very still. Why is he texting you about her? Her mouth formed each word like a separate step. I felt the room tilt again and forced it flat. Because this includes him, I said without decoration. Lena's chair scraped backward and bit the floor. She stood and braced her hands on the table. Her breathing shortened and then steadied by force. You're telling me this touches my marriage? I didn't nod and I didn't blink either. The space between us turned sharp as glass. Say it, her voice dropped low and dangerous. I saw Christmas lights reflected in her eyes. I saw them blow out one by one in silence. I opened my mouth and let the first shard fall. Zoe crossed the line with your husband. Lena didn't sit again, she lunged for my phone. I slid it away and locked the screen fast. Prove it, she breathed, shoulders squared for impact. I nodded once and reached for the drawer. Eviden. Z makes enemies or saves daughters, tonight decides. I placed a folded printout on the table. Her fingers hovered, then pinched the edge hard. 2 names at the top, 1 thread below. She read 4 lines and dropped it like fire. Call him now, she barked, eyes blazing. The screen lit before I touched anything. Mark's name climbed up with a fresh alert. I answered on speaker and held my breath. Where are you? Lena cut in like a knife. Silence stretched, then a cough filled the line. At work, he offered, voice thin and careful. You're off today, she replied, knuckles whitening against wood. Another cough, then a scrape like a chair. Let's meet and talk in person, he tried. Talk starts now, she snapped, jaw locked. I set the phone flat between us. Did you touch my sister? Lena pushed, words clipped. Air crackled through the speaker, then a whisper. Please don't do this on the phone. My stomach flipped and Lena leaned closer. Answer the question, she pressed, breath steady and fierce. The line hummed, then 2 words arrived. I messed up, my vision narrowed to a pin. Lena jerked like she'd been shoved backward. Once, he added, and the room tilted. My pulse counted 4 beats and stopped counting. Lena paced 2 steps and planted her feet. When, not a plea, an order with teeth. He hesitated and a clock ticked in my ear. Last month, he muttered, and I felt bile. She looked at me like I'd loaded the gun. More than once, I said, and heat rose. Mark's breath hitched through the tiny speaker. That's not fair, he protested, voice shrinking small. Fair died when trust died, and he knew. The bell screamed and nobody moved at first. 3 quick rings, then a knuckle thumped the door. Lena headed down the hall like a storm. Don't, I called, but the chain rattled. Zoe stood there, cheeks raw, eyes steady. Let me in, she said, bag fixed to her shoulder. Lena blocked the frame with both arms. We're done, Lena hissed, breath trembling with heat. Zoe's mouth tightened, then she looked past her. Mom, she called, voice level like a dare. I took the phone off speaker and pocketed it. 1 step, then another, until I reached them. Inside, I said, and pulled the door wider. Lena didn't move, so I pushed once. Zoe slid by with a rigid spine. We formed a triangle around the table again. Everyone chose a side like a chessboard. Zoe gripped the chair back and stood tall. Ask me, she said, chin lifted an inch. Lena laughed without joy, then bit her lip. Did you sleep with him? Lena said, no tremor. Zoe's stare stayed on me, stubborn and cold. Yes, she didn't blink, and Lena flared. A glass somewhere cracked inside my chest. I love him, she added, and time warped. I raised my palm and stopped the next words. Love doesn't change what you carved, I said. Zoe swallowed, then went quiet, then nodded once. She pulled her phone and passed it over. Read the last week, she whispered, almost defiant. Lena snatched it first and scrolled fast. Her eyes jumped, then stalled, then burned. They plan a trip, she breathed, voice thin. My fingers curled on the table until they hurt. Zoe watched us both and refused to flinch. I took the phone and skimmed the thread. Short lines, too warm, too frequent for cousins. A hotel name, then a photo of tickets. No dates listed yet, but enough to scorch. My throat tightened and I shoved it back. Give me his number, Lena demanded with precision. You already have it, I reminded, voice low. I want Zoe's version, she fired, palm out. Zoe tapped the digits and held the screen. Lena copied them and squared her shoulders. She dialed and walked 6 paces away. Pick up, she ordered the air with ferocity. I watched her face while listening to nothing. The call connected and her mouth hardened. Tell me where you are right now. Zoe stood near me and whispered to herself. I didn't plan to hurt anyone, she murmured. I bristled and kept my eyes on Lena. Across the line came muffled sounds and stammering. Lena listened, then cut him off clean. Tonight, she said, and ended the call. She faced us with a blade of calm. We meet at his mother's place in 1 hour. My breath stuck neutral ground with family witnesses. No one walks out of that untouched. Zoe nodded like she had rehearsed steps. I'll come, she offered, voice flat as paper. You won't, Lena snapped, pointing toward the door. This is my marriage, not your theater. Zoe flinched and set her jaw stubborn. I stepped between them and claimed the space. We go together or we divide forever. Lena stared, then looked away, then back again. Fine, she said, and the word felt heavy. 5 minutes to leave, bring nothing extra. Zoe grabbed her bag and paused at the threshold. I want you there, she told me without blinking. I nodded and reached for my coat hook. Keys clinked once and settled like a verdict. Outside the Yang, an Eve night began to growl. Mark texted again before we reached the car. I opened it and read the short line. Please don't tell her everything, his panic leaked. I showed Lena without a single word. Her smile came thin, dangerous, final. We drove without music and counted intersections. Zoe kept her eyes on the road straight ahead. I rehearsed 3 sentences and then deleted them. We pulled up 2 houses short and cut the lights. I needed 30 seconds to not shake. We walked the last stretch on stiff legs. A gate clicked and a porch light woke. The door swung wide before we climbed the step. His mother stood there with pressed lips and worry. Mark waited behind her with hands clasped tight. Lena brushed past both and stopped inside. Table, she said, demanding a battleground now. Chairs scraped and someone cleared a throat with nerves. I took the far side and planted my feet. Zoe hovered near the wall, jaw clenched. I want every detail, Lena announced with steel. Mark's eyes slid to me, pleading for mercy. I folded my arms and met his stare. Start with the first text and don't skip. He looked down and unlocked his phone. Words poured in fragments while Lena counted. Dates, times, places arranged like steps down. Zoe didn't move, but her breathing changed pace. I noted one hotel I didn't recognize at all. We reached last night and the room chilled. Enough, Lena cut through and raised a hand. She turned to Zoe and kept her voice controlled. You will not come to Christmas, not this year. Zoe blinked twice and swallowed something jagged. I understand, she said, but her stare burned. I leaned forward and claimed my small boundary. You will not call him until this ends. Mark nodded quickly, then stopped, then nodded again. His mother watched us like a storm watcher. No one offered tea, and thank God for that. Lena stood and buttoned her coat in jerks. This conversation continues with a lawyer next, she said. Mark sagged against the counter and rubbed his face. Zoe's fingers curled around the chair until white. I reached for the door and didn't look back. Out on the street, the cold-cut decision's clear. Zoe walked 3 strides behind, breathing hard. Lena matched my pace and stared straight ahead. None of us spoke until we reached the car. Christmas had shifted and the ground kept sliding. The locksmith drilled while fists hammered the front panel. Metal screeched, then the bit deeper. Mark yelled through the gap. Lena folded her arms and stared at the hinges. I stood behind her with my thumb on 911. We had 10 seconds before the next bad choice. Open this now, his shout scraped across the hall. Lena nodded to the locksmith and he kept working. I called out through the wood with a steady tone. Step back or we call the police. The pounding stopped, then returned harder. The chain slid free and Lena cracked the entrance. Mark filled the frame with a flushed face and shaking hands. Keys, Lena said, palm out like a bailiff. He tossed them to the floor and kicked one. Let me get my stuff before you change everything. 5 minutes, Lena checked her watch and stepped aside. He pushed past and scanned the living room fast. I followed close, ready to block if needed. He grabbed a duffel and shoved clothes in blind. Buttons snapped and he didn't look down. Footsteps hit the porch again, too light for him. I knew before I turned that it was Zoe. She hovered on the step with a tight jaw. Let me talk to him alone. Lena laughed once and shook her head. We're done with your private meetings. Zoe held my gaze as if passing a baton. I won't make trouble at the gathering, she offered softly. Lena pointed at the street like a referee. You already did and you're not crossing back. Mark reappeared with the bag slung high. He froze when he saw Zoe near the threshold. No, Lena said and slipped between them. He shifted left and she mirrored him tight. I moved up and set my palm on his chest. Zoe kept her shoes on the mat and didn't blink. I need 2 minutes to say goodbye. Lena's chin tipped up and her nostrils flared. Say it from there and make it short. Zoe's fingers twisted the strap until it squeaked. I'll handle the hotel cancellation. Mark glanced at me like I might nod approval. I let silence fill the space like smoke. Lena leaned forward with a low, clean tone. You'll handle your marriage first. His phone vibrated and he killed the notification. Zoe winced and looked at the floorboards hard. Stop contacting him outside counsel, Lena warned. Zoe swallowed and gave a tiny shrug. She wanted a loophole and found none. He edged toward the doorway, bag bumping his hip. Lena stepped aside just enough for him to pass. Zoe moved with him and I stayed put. Don't let her chase you out, Zoe whispered. Lena's shoulders squared and the air thinned. I'm not chasing him anywhere, Lena breathed with cant. Well, I'm showing him the exit he earned. She grabbed the keys from the floor and pocketed them. New locks by noon, she added like a weather report. I believed her and so did he. Mark reached the porch and stopped dead. His mother stood on the walk with tight lips. She looked at me first, then at Lena, then down. I'll take him for a few nights, she said. Good, Lena answered and didn't thank her. Zoe stepped outside and blocked the path. Talk to me later, please, her voice barely carried. Mark stared past her at the parked car. He nodded once without moving his mouth. That tiny nod set Lena's teeth grinding. The locksmith handed over the new set. Lena signed and shut the door with a click. We listened to tires crunch away from the curb. Zoe remained on the step like a statue. I waited for her to leave and she didn't. She looked at me through the glass and tapped once. I opened halfway and kept my foot braced. Don't freeze me out, she said with a strained calm. This isn't a phase for me. It sounded like a pledge and a threat. You made a choice that endangers the family. I kept my tone even and my hands still. You will not attend the meal, I added. Her eyes shone and then drained to stone. I expected that, she answered, almost daring me. So expect the rest, Lena cut in from behind. No calls after 9 and no surprise visits. Zoe exhaled like she'd been punched in the ribs. I won't harass anyone, she said in a whisper. Promises feel cheap at the scene of the crime. Zoe's shoulders sagged and then straightened again. I need one thing from you right now. Lena folded her arms and waited without blinking. Give me back my spare key. I felt the shift before Lena reacted. Zoe held out her palm with a tiny tremor. You don't live here, Lena answered with ice. That key stays retired for good. Zoe stared at her hand and let it drop. Something hard settled behind her eyes. She turned away and took 3 steps. Then she pivoted and fired one more line. I'm late, she said and watched my face. Lena frowned, mind racing to catch the signal. Zoe didn't clarify and then she left. Lena closed the door and braced her back. What did she mean by late? My stomach tightened and my breath came thin. If the word meant what I feared, we were sunk. Fires multiply when you add a cradle. The morning crawled until my phone rang again. Unknown number, urgent tone, clipped introduction. Clinic, the voice said, asking for Zoe by surname. I asked why and received a polite refusal. They would call back, which meant there was something. Lena watched my face as I ended the call. Was that about her? Her fingers flexed once. I nodded and told her the single detail. Her jaw locked, then loosened with force. We're not rescuing anyone from consequences. Agreed, I said and meant it without flinching. But we're not abandoning a grandchild either. The word landed heavy and stayed between us. Lena stared at the wall and then at me. Her eyes cooled but didn't thaw. The door rattled again before noon struck. A courier stood there with a manila envelope. Service for Mark, he announced, holding out the papers. Lena accepted with a curt nod and a pen. He left as fast as he arrived. She opened the packet and skimmed in silence. Interim separation terms, she announced with crisp precision. A line item caught her attention and mine. No contact clause including siblings until mediation. Zoe's name printed in black made my chest clench. Lena placed the document flat and looked at me. You deliver a copy to her. My scalp prickled and I felt the risk. But I took the papers and grabbed my coat. Some errands demand a witness with a steady spine. Zoe answered at a rented room off the highway. She opened the door only halfway and stayed back. You came alone, she noted, eyes flicking to the hall. I'm not hiding anyone, I said and held up the packet. She stared like I'd brought a verdict. She skimmed, then stopped on the no contact clause. You always pick her, she muttered, not looking up. I'm picking order over chaos, I replied with care. Her lips pressed thin and then quivered. Then pick this, she said and touched her belly. Heat rose to my neck as the room tilted. How far? I asked, voice rougher than before. 8 weeks, she answered, and I gripped the chair back. We let the seconds pass like slow stones. She didn't cry and neither did I. You will inform the mediator immediately. Her chin dipped, then lifted with new stubbornness. I'll keep the appointment, she said through clenched teeth. And you will not attend the holiday, I added again. She nodded once like signing away summer. Outside, wind snapped through my coat and cleared hesitation. I called Lena before I reached the car door. She's pregnant, I said, letting the word stand. Silence traveled the line and then cracked. We hold the boundary, she answered, steady and fierce. I sat behind the wheel and watched the motel walkway. Zoe leaned on the rail and stared into nowhere. I wanted to run to her and didn't move. Two futures pulled hard in opposite directions. I chose the one with rules and braced for impact. The mediator closed us in and hit the timer. Lena slid a folder across the table with steady hands. Mark stared at the carpet and adjusted his cuff twice. I kept my palms flat to keep my voice even. Zoe faced the wall and refused to blink. Ground rules, the mediator said, voice calm, eyes alert. No interruptions, one speaker at a time. Lena nodded once and pointed to the folder. Start with the reservation records, she said, controlled and cool. Mark shifted in his chair and looked smaller. He reached for the folder and skimmed the pages. A confirmation screen, a check-in time, 2 names. He swallowed, then pushed the set back toward center. I won't dispute those entries, he murmured, almost inaudible. Lena leaned back and folded her arms hard. Paternity next, she said, gaze like a level. Zoe flinched and then straightened her shoulders. I want a test at 12 weeks, Lena continued evenly. Mar. Kay nodded fast, then glanced at me for help. I offered none and he understood. Zoe's hands curled into fists on her lap. You don't control my appointments, she said without raising volume. You lost that, Lena answered, keeping her breath steady. The mediator lifted a palm for order and balance. Medical choices remain hers, but testing is separate. Mark cleared his throat and finally looked up. I'll pay for everything as long as it's mine. Zoe shot him a look that could cut thread. Don't act generous, she whispered through clenched teeth. The mediator clicked the timer and reset the room. Holiday plan, she prompted, turning the page slowly. Seating chart already adjusted, Lena replied without blinking. Zoe's mouth twitched, then settled into a hard line. I wasn't coming anyway, she said with a shrug. I stared at the table and felt the floor sway. A knock interrupted, fast and urgent like an alarm. The mediator stood and cracked the door an inch. A receptionist handed over a small envelope quickly. For them, she said, then vanished down the corridor. The mediator placed it between us like a grenade. Lena slid it open and scanned the card. Temporary restraining order hearing moved to Friday. Mark's face blanched and he gripped the chair edge. Zoe looked at me, then at her flat stomach. The clock kept ticking, loud and indifferent. We'll comply, Lena said, folding the notice once. The mediator blew out a slow breath and regrouped. Last item, communication protocol until then. I spoke before anyone else could jump in. No direct contact, all messages through me. Zoe stared at me as if I'd stolen oxygen. You're not neutral, she said, voice sharp and low. I'm stable, I answered, meeting her glare without blinking. You can root through counsel, Lena added calmly. The mediator wrote that down and closed the file. We walked out in silence and hit the elevator. Zoe punched the button and held her breath. Mark stayed behind like a scolded teenager. Doors opened and we stepped in with space between. I felt the car begin to drop like a stone. On the ground floor, Zoe veered toward the exit. Lena moved to follow, but I caught her sleeve. "Give me 10 minutes, I whispered, not asking. She hesitated, then nodded once and checked her watch. "I'll wait outside, but not forever." I found Zoe at the corner near the crosswalk. She watched the traffic surge like it might answer. "I made an appointment," she said, eyes on the lane. "What kind?" I asked, heart clenched tight. "Ultrasound," she replied and finally looked at me. "When?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "In 2 hours," she said, jaw rigid and brave. "I want to know if everything is okay." My mouth formed words slower than my thoughts moved. "I'll go with you if you want." She almost said no and then didn't. "You don't get to scold me there," she warned. "I'll sit and shut up," I promised, meaning it. Lena waved from the curb and joined us slowly. Zoe tensed like she expected a blow. "I'll drive you," Lena said, tone surprisingly even. "You can sit in the back and breathe." Zoe considered it for a long beat. "Fine," she answered, then handed me the appointment slip. My fingers shook and I hid them quickly. At the clinic desk, Zoe gave her information quietly. The nurse asked for an emergency contact name. Zoe looked at me, then at Lena, then down. She wrote mine and passed the clipboard back. Something heavy shifted in my chest without noise. We sat with a digital clock counting slow minutes. Zoe bounced a knee and then forced it still. Lena stared at the opposite wall and didn't blink. I kept my breathing measured and my hands folded. A door opened and Zoe's name came through. "Do you want them with you?" the tech asked gently. Zoe hesitated, then pointed only at me. Lena's mouth thinned, but she stayed put. "We'll be quick," I said, already on my feet. Zoe squeezed my fingers once and let go. The exam table creaked and the machine hummed. I watched the monitor while the tech adjusted settings. A small pulse flickered, faint and stubborn and undeniable. Zoe inhaled hard and covered her mouth. I reached for her shoulder and stopped halfway. "Heartbeat present," the tech said, businesslike and clear. Measuring aligned with estimated dates. Zoe's eyes flooded and then steadied again. She nodded and stared at the screen like a verdict. I had no words that wouldn't tip everything over. We walked back to the lobby with new silence. Lena stood immediately and searched our faces fast. Zoe slipped the printout into her jacket pocket. "Confirmed," she said, and that one word shook us. Lena blinked twice, then looked away. Outside, Mark waited by the curb with a grim face. His mother hovered behind him with a stiff stance. "Please," he started, stepping forward with empty hands. Lena raised her palm and he halted. "This is not your stage today." He lowered at his eyes and spoke to the pavement. "I'll sign the testing order right now." Zoe pulled the printout and held it tight. "You won't use this to pull me back." His shoulders sagged as if something broke. His mother touched my elbow with a plea. "Don't punish the baby for their mess." "I won't," I said and meant every syllable. "But I will protect my other child." She nodded once and stepped away slowly. A car pulled up with a tinted rear window. A process server stepped out holding another packet. "Notice for Miss Zoe," he announced coolly. Zoe accepted and flipped through with shaking fingers. "Emergency hearing advanced to tomorrow," she read aloud. Lena exhaled and checked her calendar on reflex. "I'll be there at 9, she said without looking up. Mark reached for Zoe and stopped short. "Do you need a ride?" he asked carefully. Zoe folded the notice and shook her head. "I'm staying at the motel," she said, voice flat. I offered to drop her and she nodded once. Lena opened the passenger door and paused. "You good to ride and back with me?" she asked. Zoe slid in without a word. During the drive, my phone vibrated nonstop. Group thread lighting up with questions and theories. I muted it and focused on the road lines. Zoe watched passing storefronts like they were a test. Lena stared straight ahead and clenched the seatbelt. We pulled into the motel lot and idled. Zoe stared at the second-floor walkway and shivered. "Do you want me to walk you up?" I asked. She shook her head and reached for the handle. "Come tomorrow," she whispered, eyes fixed forward. "To court," Lena confirmed, turning halfway in her seat. Zoe nodded and opened the door slowly. She stepped out and closed it with a soft click. I watched until she reached the stairs and vanished. The empty space in my chest grew teeth. On the way home, Lena finally spoke. "I'll file the updated petition tonight," she stated. "Include third-party contact terms," I answered quickly. She looked at me, surprised I'd go that far. "Family safety first," I added, no tremor. My phone lit again before we reached the block. A single line from Zoe, no greeting attached. "Don't let him call me tonight." I forwarded it to Mark with only 2 words. "Respect boundaries," I wrote and hit send. We parked and sat without unbuckling. Snow flurries started and melted on the windshield. Lena gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles paled. "Tomorrow decides the whole season," she murmured finally. I nodded and felt the truth settle like a weight. The clerk called the case and we stood at once. Lena squared her shoulders and set her jaw hard. Zoe slid into the opposite chair without looking over. Mark tugged his sleeve and scanned the gallery. I kept my hands laced to stop any tremble. "Emergency matters only," the judge warned, voice clipped and brisk. "Keep answers short and precise." Lena nodded and passed up a slim motion. Zoe's counsel did the same with a tight smile. Mark's attorney whispered something and adjusted his files. "Alleged boundary breaches since notice," the judge prompted, eyes steady. Lena raised 2 fingers and pointed to the exhibits. "Uninvited contact at the residence, repeated digital outreach." She slid screenshots forward like numbered chess moves. Mark looked down and didn't blink. Zoe's attorney lifted a single page. "Client complied with the no-contact terms." The judge scanned and paused on a highlighted line. "Who used the anonymous number ending in 63? Silence spread, then Mark's counsel cleared his throat once. "A message was sent requesting a conversation." The judge's eyebrow barely twitched and then flattened. "From whom?" The word hit like a gavel itself. Mark stared straight ahead and swallowed hard. "My client," the attorney answered, barely above air. "Violation established," the judge concluded, tone spare and final. "Temporary order stands with added conditions." Zoe folded her arms and stared at the table. Lena's lips tightened, then relaxed by force. I felt my pulse return to a manageable thud. "Requested medical testing," the judge continued, eyes moving fast. "Any dispute on timing?" Zoe's counsel shook her head once. "We accept a lab appointment after week 12. Mark whispered to his attorney and then nodded. "Primary communication channel," the judge asked without looking up. "Family member suggested as intermediary." 3 heads turned toward me like magnets. I raised my chin and did not fidget. "I can relay documents without editorializing." "You volunteer," the judge confirmed, checking the box. "Role limited to forwarding and scheduling." I agreed with a small nod and 1 word. "Understood." My throat felt tight but steady. "Responsibility burns cleaner when rules are firm." "Holiday event at the mother's home," the judge read. "Is attendance contested?" Lena answered first with a crisp no. Zoe's counsel stood and lifted a paw. "My client will not enter the property." "Good," the judge said, closing that door. "Next, immediate safety concerns raised by texts." Lena pointed to a line captured at midnight. I recognized the timestamp and held my breath. The judge read the threat and looked up. "Who wrote 'Do not test me or I show up'?" I swung to Mark and then to Zoe. Zoe stiffened and shook her head hard. Mark shifted, then sagged in his chair. "My client sent it in anger," the attorney admitted. The judge leaned forward and lowered his voice. "You will use counsel for every syllable." He issued a fine and set a compliance review. The date landed like a stone in water. Mark nodded, mute and pale. Zoe's lawyer raised a finger for 1 more issue. "Online posts," she held up screenshots dated yesterday. "Indirect comments implying pregnancy and private details." Lena's eyes flashed and then went cold. The judge skimmed and then looked over his glasses. "Take down anything pointing to this matter." His tone turned sharper as he listed penalties. Zoe pressed her lips together and nodded once. Mark sat still as if rooted to the chair. My chest loosened by 1 notch only. "Final item," the judge announced, tapping his pen. "Interim spousal support and housing access." That was a new battlefield and it opened fast. Lena presented a lease and a payment record. Mark stared at the floor and stayed silent. Keys surrendered last night, Lena stated, clear and calm. Door locks changed by midday. The judge reviewed, then signed a temporary arrangement. Access for supervised retrieval only with police present. Mark exhaled, then caught the breath again. Next hearing in January, the judge concluded with speed. Orders remain until then. He stood and the bailiff called the room. We filed out into the hall with stiff steps. The air out there felt heavier than inside. Lena leaned against the wall and counted backward. Zoe hovered by the elevator with her eyes unfocused. Mark remained near a bench and rubbed his temples. I approached Zoe with careful steps and distance. We'll get the appointment booked today. She flicked her gaze to me and backed down. I want you there, she said, barely moving her mouth. I will sit quiet, I promised, palms open. Lena joined us and stopped 2 paces away. Fine, she said, voice even but guarded. Mark edged closer and looked at Zoe's shoes. I'll handle the lab fee, he offered quickly. Zoe shifted her weight and didn't answer. Lena stepped between them with measured control. Send receipts through counsel and stop improvising. He retreated half a step and nodded once. His mother approached with a tentative touch on my sleeve. Dinner tonight, she suggested, soft but urgent. Ground rules only, no accusations. Lena's eyes closed for a beat, then opened. That could help, I said, hearing my own surprise. Zoe stared at me like I'd switched teams. It's not reconciliation, I explained, keeping tone low. It's protocol so nobody explodes next week. Her jaw unclenched a fraction and then said again. We left the building and met the cold. Cars groaned along the curb with holiday errands. Zoe zipped her jacket and tucked her chin. Lena scanned the street and spotted a familiar sedan. Mark watched us from the far corner, hands empty. I looked straight at him until he looked away. Then I led the others toward our car. During the drive, the group chat revived with noise. A cousin asked about schedules and desserts in chairs. I ignored all of it and focused on lanes. Back home, the doorbell rang almost immediately. A courier again, but a different company. Delivery for the household, he announced briskly. I signed and set the box on the entry table. Zoe hovered near the coat rack, undecided. Lena cut the tape and lifted the lid. Inside lay a small sealed pouch with a note. Home test kit for chain of custody sample. Zoe frowned and reached for the instruction page. I intercepted and handed it to Lena first. We're not using a mail-in service, Lena declared. Lab draw only, witnessed and recorded. Zoe folded her arms and glanced at the clock. I'll do the lab, she said, short and firm. A spark of agreement flickered for once. We booked the appointment for Friday noon. The confirmation pinged, and I forwarded the details. Counsel copied, mediator copied, paper trail secure. Zoe stared at the timestamp and bit her lip. Lena nodded, satisfied but still coiled tight. Dinner at his mother's, I reminded gently. Zoe shrugged like she'd rather swallow gravel. I'll go if I can leave whenever I want. You can, Lena answered, keeping eye contact steady. No speeches and no secret planning. Before we left, my phone flashed a new alert. An unknown account posted a blurred silhouette of Zoe. Caption hinted at drama and named no one. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. I flagged it and saved the link for evidence. We reached the house at 6 on the dot. A porch light snapped on and the door cracked. Mark's mother opened wide and stepped aside. No hugs, no pleasantries, only space yielded. That was more mercy than anyone deserved. We sat at the table with 3 empty chairs. Mark stayed standing near the corner like a guard. Lena placed her phone face down and still. Zoe kept her hands on her knees and waited. I cleared my throat and started the rules. First, calendar for the week ahead. I slid a printed grid across the surface. Zoe traced the column for Friday and nodded. Mark leaned in and then stopped himself. Lena tapped Saturday and kept her finger there. No drop-bys and no doorstep gifts, she set forth. Everything moves through me or the attorneys. Mark's mother exhaled like she'd been bracing for impact. That can be done, she offered, eyes on both. Zoe's gaze softened a degree and then reset. Second, public silence until January, I added. No posts, no vague messages, no hints. Zoe looked at the tabletop and drummed once. Mark's eyes cut sideways and gave him away. Lena's mouth twitched into something almost like humor. I know your burner accounts, she said flatly. Mark winced and nodded with minimal pride. His mother pressed a hand to her forehead. I'll monitor his phone for a while, she said. He blushed, ashamed or angry or both. Third, I will not be a messenger for love notes. My words landed harder than I planned. Zoe blinked and kept her face clean. Mark's fists tightened and then released. Lena sat back and finally breathed longer. Mark cleared his throat and tried a new approach. I want to enroll in counseling next week. Zoe's head jerked and then stilled. Lena turned slightly, not impressed, not dismissive. Enroll alone, she answered, crisp as paper. He nodded and didn't add another plea. His mother rose and carried out a shallow dish. We each took a portion because refusing would escalate. Zoe ate 2 bites and put the fork down. I forced myself to finish and keep neutral eyes. Halfway through, the doorbell chimed with a single ring. Mark checked the peephole and stiffened visibly. He opened to reveal a uniformed officer. Escort for property retrieval, the officer announced. Lena stood calm and prepared. 15 minutes, the officer confirmed, flipping a page. List only, no substitutions. Mark nodded and moved toward the hallway. His mother followed with a clipboard and pen. Zoe stared at me, panic creeping up fast. Do not go with him, I whispered, sharp and low. She sank back and clenched both hands together. Lena watched the clock like a hawk on a wire. The officer checked every doorway with bored precision. We waited while the house yielded exactly 12 items. Mark returned with 2 bags and a folder. The officer ticked boxes and waved him on. He paused at the threshold and looked at Zoe. Her face didn't change, not even a twitch. He left without a final word and good. We wrapped up with signatures and a bare goodbye. Zoe stood first and headed outside without waiting. Lena and I followed into the cold air. At the curb, Zoe grabbed my sleeve and squeezed. I need to ask you something I hate. I braced for another fracture and nodded once. If the test proves him, she whispered, eyes wild. Will you let me be near the family again? The question sliced me clean and then kept cutting. I'll fight for safety and fairness, I managed. That's not a yes, she shot back and stepped away. She melted into the dark like a shadow leaving. Lena exhaled through her teeth and stared after her. We're almost at the last cliff, she murmured. I wasn't sure if we'd jump or build a bridge. On the drive home, my screen flashed twice more. A blocked caller left a voicemail with muffled sobbing. The transcription wrote, "Help me, he won't stop knocking." The motel's address appeared and a room number. I swung the car around without asking permission. Lena gripped the handle and called the desk. Security will meet us, the clerk promised promptly. We pulled in and spotted 2 figures arguing. One was not Mark, and that changed everything. A man in a baseball cap pounded the door. Zoe's voice came through, thin and terrified. Leave or I call the police right now. The stranger rattled the knob and cursed under breath. I stepped forward and then stopped at the shout. Security turned the corner with a heavy flashlight. The guard inserted himself and ordered the man to leave. The man backed off and barked one more threat. He stalked to a truck and drove out fast. Zoe opened the door with watery eyes and shaking lips. He found my location from that post, she choked. I wrapped my arms around her, then released quickly. We reported it already, I reminded, voice steady. Lena walked a perimeter and scanned every shadow. Pack what you need and come with us, she urged. Zoe hesitated, fear battling pride on her face. Just tonight, I added, gently but firm. Guest room with a lock and the alarm set. She nodded and grabbed a small bag from the chair. Security took the plate number and radioed the desk. We followed their escort out with our lights on. Back at the house, I set the alarm while Zoe watched. Lena texted the caseworker and flagged the incident. Within minutes, we received a confirmation email. A new condition would be added to the order. Harassment by third parties now under immediate sanctions. Zoe sat on the edge of the guest bed. Her shoulders shook once and then stilled completely. I hate everyone who knows, she whispered into her hands. I know, I answered, folding a blanket tight. Tomorrow we keep quiet and we keep moving. She lay down without turning off the lamp. I left the door cracked and listened from the hall. Lena leaned against the opposite wall and breath slow. We keep the holiday plan exactly as written, she said. I nodded, but sleep felt a long way off. At 2 a.m., a text arrived from an unknown number. A photo of Zoe at the clinic waiting room. Caption read, "Round 2 tomorrow, don't miss it." My stomach flipped hard and I saved the image. We were not done with surprises, not even close. The alarm shrieked, someone rattled the guest room handle. I was halfway down the hall before thought caught up. Who's out there? My voice cut, ready to summon help. Maintenance, a whisper tried, thin and shaky. I hit the panic button and waited for footsteps. Lena appeared beside me and lifted a heavy flashlight. Zoe pressed her back to the door and breathed fast. Security patched in through the speaker near the frame. Units en route, stay inside and hold position. A shadow slid across the peephole and vanished. 2 minutes later, a patrol car idled at the curb. An officer swept the yard and signaled clear. He took our statement and logged the late-night photo. Likely the same account, he said with dry certainty. Zoe trembled once and then locked it down. We reset the code and walked away without talking. Zoe sat on the couch and crouched over her phone. I'm changing numbers, she muttered, thumbs moving fast. Do it now, Lena answered, already drafting an email. We stayed in motion because stillness lets panic breed. At 8 sharp, the lab confirmed our slot. Chain of custody testing, 10 minutes on site. Arrive separately, the instructions warned in bold type. We synchronized watches like officers before a raid. No room for improvisation today. Zoe wrapped a scarf high and tucked her hair. I'll meet you at the entrance near the pharmacy. I nodded and handed her a printout with directions. Straight in, straight out, no detours, I pressed. She gave a quick salute without a smile. At the lab, a clerk checked IDs with dry efficiency. Zoe stepped to station 1 and held still. Mark approached from the opposite door with empty hands. His eyes darted, searching for a place to land. Lena stood between them like a steel gate. One at a time, the tech instructed and gestured. Swab signatures, sealed envelopes slid through a slot. I watched the clerk stamp numbers in record times. Zoe's jaw twitched as she initialed the final line. The envelope disappeared, and tension didn't. Back outside, Mark tried to speak and failed twice. He pointed at Zoe's abdomen with a trembling finger. She folded her arms and angled away sharply. Not your moment, Lena warned with measured volume. He lowered his hand and stepped back. His mother arrived then with a paper bag. Food for later, she said, eyes on me. I accepted and nodded to mark the attempt. Zoe stared at the sidewalk like it could swallow us. We scattered to separate cars on cue. On the drive home, my screen pinged again. Unknown account posted a cropped ultrasound printout. Caption read, heard a tiny drum today. I took a screenshot and forwarded everything to counsel. Then I blocked, blocked again. At noon, the mediator texted a single directive. Complete holiday schedule now, no exceptions. We sat at the table with pens and a calendar. Lena tapped the date and set a firm window. Zoe looked at the ceiling and bit her lip. You will be gone before anyone arrives, Lena stated. 2 hours prior, no overlap allowed. Zoe exhaled through her nose and kept still. I'll pick up my things after New Year, she said. That spared us a fresh fight today. The doorbell rang, Dad on the step with a casserole. He saw Zoe behind me and froze mid-breath. Later, I told him, holding up a flat palm. He swallowed, then nodded and retreated 1 step. I closed the door gently but not soft. Zoe zipped her jacket and lifted her bag. I need a ride to the motel for now. I grabbed the keys, already moving toward the hall. Lena stayed, glued to the schedule like a lifeline. We were splitting the work and it worked. Halfway there, Zoe's new phone pinged with a fresh message. A number she didn't know asked for the room count. I took the device and powered it down. Start with 0 contacts until this settles, I said. She nodded and looked out at a line of shops. At the desk, the clerk pulled our file by reflex. We've moved her to a different floor, he said. Unlisted quiet side, extra camera coverage. Zoe's shoulders lowered a fraction at that. He slid a new keycard across and pointed left. Back home, Lena had the seating plan drafted. 3 spots open, 1 space marked empty. She looked at me, waiting for my pushback. Keep it empty, I answered, voice steady as I could. Absence speaks louder than apologies. Afternoon crept, more messages, more speculation, more noise. I muted the thread and set the phone face down. Lena cleaned off the table with tight focused motions. I wrapped 2 gifts and labeled one with initials only. We worked side by side without language. At 4, a knock. Mark stood on the stoop alone. A gift bag dangled from his fingers with awkward weight. He didn't cross the threads. Hold, and that was new. For the older child, he said, eyes lowered. Lena took it, inspected the tag, and stepped back. Drop and go, she instructed, tone neutral but final. He nodded once and lifted his hands empty. No plea, no speech, just slow retreat. The gate clicked behind him like a sealed jar. I let out a breath I didn't realize I held. At 5, I drove to the motel with a thermos. Zoe opened at the first knock and stepped aside. Her eyes were swollen, but her spine looked straighter. Eat something, I urged, pouring into a cup. She took it and blew across the surface. I can't shake the drum sound, she murmured. I sat on the edge of the chair and waited. I wanted to record it, she added, voice thin. We'll hear it again, I said, not entirely sure. Her gaze flicked to the clock and then to me. I'll leave before guests arrive, she confirmed. I'll text you from the parking lot gate. I nodded and squeezed her shoulder once. You're making a choice that protects people, I said. She blinked hard and pulled her sleeves over her hands. Back home, Lena had set the table with ruthless symmetry. Dad returned with a pie and a rigid smile. Aunt Myra followed, carrying guilt and 2 folded napkins. No one said Zoe's name, but everyone thought it. I held the line and ushered them to their seats. The door sounded again, 2 cousins bouncing with energy. I hugged both and directed them to the couch. Myra tugged me aside and whispered fast. Are we expecting trouble at the door? Not if we keep to the plan, I answered. My phone buzzed. Zoe from the motel gate. Leaving now, driving to Mark's mother for a plate. I read it twice and looked at Lena. She gave a single nod and checked her watch. We had a narrow window before guests started arriving. I cracked the window in the kitchen and listened. Car engines, city hum, a siren far away. Nothing urgent, nothing close, just the world grinding on. I set plates down and tested the carving knife. Hands ready, mind braced, heart divided. At 6 exactly, Lena tapped her glass once. Before we eat, ground rule for tonight. She looked around the rectangle and held each gaze. We keep conversation in the present, no speculation. Heads dipped, some grudging, none defiant. We served food and passed dishes clockwise. Laughter tried a few times, then gave up early. Dad poured water and cleared his throat once. Good to be together, he managed, eyes damp. I squeezed his arm and then let go. The bell rang, my chest spiked, then I remembered the list. A neighbor at the threshold with borrowed cookware. He apologized and retreated quickly with thanks. My pulse eased back into its cage. We rejoined the table and picked up our forks. Halfway through, a text from Mark's mother flashed. Zoe is here, eating quietly, we'll leave after dessert. I showed Lena and watched relief shadow her face. Thank you, she typed back after a beat. I exhaled slowly and tasted salt. Then the porch camera chimed on my phone. A figure stood on the walk with a hood up. Too tall for Mark, wrong stance for the neighbor. He paced once, then raised a phone and snapped a picture. I slipped away and signaled Lena with 2 fingers. We watched from the side window without turning on the light. He backtracked, studying the side gate with intent. I called the non-emergency line and reported a prowler. Lena recorded him from an angle for later. The figure lingered, then moved toward the alley. Patrol rolled up quicker than I hoped. The prowler bolted and rounded the corner fast. An officer followed on foot and radioed a plate. Minutes ticked while our family held their breath inside. Finally, a text from dispatch arrived, vehicle located and stopped. I returned to the table and kept my voice calm. Police handled a trespasser near the side gate. Myra clutched her napkin and whispered a prayer. Dad stared at his hands and finally took a bite. Lena poured herself water and swallowed hard. We finished the main course in measured silence. Then my phone lit again with 2 messages. Zoe sent a photo of an empty dish and a thumbs up. Mark's mother followed with a request for a quick call. I stepped into the hall and answered. Drive her to the motel now, she urged. Someone sat across the street and recorded us. My skin tightened and the old dread returned. I'm leaving now, I told her, already grabbing keys. Lena saw and stood from the table at once. I'll cover dessert, she said, forcing a steady smile. Take Dad's car, the tires are better. I agreed and hustled to the driveway. Cold air snapped me sharper than coffee. I focused on turns, not thoughts. I found Zoe by the curb under a bare tree. Mark's mother hovered nearby with folded arms. Across the road, a sedan idled with dark windows. I flashed high beams and the driver pulled away. We loaded Zoe's bag and left without goodbyes. On the drive, Zoe stared straight ahead. I didn't touch him or look at him, she said. You kept the promise, I answered, both proud and sad. Her new phone buzzed and she ignored it. I pulled into the motel lot and parked near the office. A patrol car sat 2 spaces down on watch. The officer nodded and scribbled our plate number. Zoe unclipped her seatbelt and paused mid-motion. 5 minutes, she said, eyes on the stairwell. Then I'm upstairs behind the lock. Call me if anything twitches wrong, I urged. She gave me a tired half smile and opened the door. On the stairs, she turned and called softly. Thanks for not using tonight to preach. I waved her on and watched until she vanished. Back home, the table was cleaner than before. Lena stood with a stack of plates and a blank face. Dad snored softly in the armchair in the den. Myra folded leftovers with mechanical precision and quiet. The house held its breath again. I opened the window an inch and listened. Far-off music, a car door, a dog bark, then quiet. No more pacing outside, no more camera alerts. For the first time all week, silence didn't accuse. It sat with us, heavy but tolerable. Lena handed me a folded card without a word. Inside, the mediator's schedule glared back at me. Lab receipt attached, court date circled, review set. We were living inside a calendar now. I folded it smaller and slid it into my pocket. The doorbell rang one last time before midnight. I braced, then opened to find a single parcel. No return address, only my name in block letters. I carried it to the kitchen and lifted the lid. Inside lay a tiny knitted cap and a note. Whatever you decide, be kind. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Lena read it, then slipped the cap into a drawer. We keep it safe, she said, voice low and even. I nodded, thinking of the drum beat we had heard. There was no neat ending waiting for us here. I poured water and we stood shoulder to shoulder. We spoke of nothing and everything in small pieces. Then my phone vibrated, Zoe again, 3 short words. Room secured, sleeping. Relief pushed tears to the edge. I blinked them back and set the phone face down. We returned to the table and filled the empty space. Myra toasted to health and Dad roused and smiled. Lena raised her glass with a steady hand. For peace, one day at a time, she offered. We drank and let the words hang between us. After the dishes, I stepped onto the porch alone. Cold air focused my mind better than speeches. Across the street, windows glowed and curtains shifted. Inside our house, voices murmured and then faded down. I locked the door and turned the bolt hard. My phone lit up one more time, one line with a photo. A close-up of the testing envelope, time-stamped in transit. Caption read, results will speak soon, keep your promises. I saved it and powered down the screen. Then I stood there, listening, ready for whatever came next.